Boys, tomatosaucin here. I hope you're having a great night. I'm coming at you live with a big Mythic Plus tier list for Dragonflight Season 1. As you know, if you paid attention, the MMO champion or WoW head, we've had some massive tuning changes in Dragonflight. Okay? Big tuning. These are going to drastically shake up the Mythic Plus meta. And I'm here to tell you what's going to happen this season. These are my picks. This is my Mythic Plus tier list, my opinion on what's going to absolutely slap in Dungeon Season 1. Because we ain't got time to raid, because we're raiding in Wrath of the Lich King Classic. You know it. All right. So let's get into it. But before we do, boys, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, which I know some of you haven't, and that's okay. I'm not even mad at you. But if you're on this video, another tier list, coming here to see what classes are going to be doing what, hear my opinion on them, click that subscribe button, boys. I'm going to have more tier lists coming in the future, and these are a good time for me, and I think they're a good time for everybody. Now let's talk about some of my credentials. Tomatosaucin. Every season I play this game in Mythic Plus, I'm a 3 to 4K player. I just kind of stop, right? I got a lot going on, and, you know, maybe that's my peak anyway, right? Maybe 25s are the highest I'd go. At the end of the day, I'm not the best, and I'm not the worst, but I have an opinion, and if you're watching this video, you value it. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grade the tanks, then I'm going to grade the healers, and then I'm going to grade the melee DPS, and finally the range. Now, my personal specialty is generally a melee DPS in Mythic Plus, but I have been known to absolutely slap on a hunter and a boomkin. I'll actually be maining hunter, and I'll get into which type of hunter when we get there for this season of Mythic Plus, while alting my Windwalker monk. Those are my 270s. Now let's get to the grades, right? Enough of the intros, enough of my credentials. We're going to start with Blood DK. Now, Blood DK, here's what's huge that Blood DK brings to the table. A lot of self-healing. You need that in Mythic Plus. Some pretty respectable damage. But if you've been running these dungeons, you absolutely know these mobs are spread out all over the freaking map, right? It's a pain in the ass to round them up. The multiple grips of a Blood DK, and they can't have many, along with their big grip, are going to come into come into help, or whatever it is, right? They're going to help out quite a bit this season. I'm going to say Blood DK. I don't know if I'd put them S tier, because it is very difficult to get into my S tier, but I'll definitely put them a high A tier tank. If there was a tier between A and S, like an A+, I think Blood DK would be there. If you're playing Blood DK, the utility that you bring to these mythic dungeons is going to be absolutely massive, and I think you're in a great spot here. Now, that brings us to our next tank, who isn't bringing a ton of utility, although the AoE shockwave stun is massive, but they're doing so much damage and so much self-healing that I don't even know how Prot Warrior made it past tuning yesterday. As I said, it's very difficult to get into my S tier. Prot Warrior, I played a ton of it in the beta. I didn't think it was going to make it out of beta in the form that it's in. When we get into better gear and tier sets, it's just going to continue to take off. Prot Warrior is high S tier, about as high as you can go on the S tier for dungeons. You can pull literally everything. If your healer dies, no problem, because you're immortal. You ain't dying. It takes a lot to kill a Prot Warrior. The damage is absurd. And where you lack in that Blood DK utility and the ability to really carry the dungeon with your utility, you just make up for it in the fact that you can pull everything, line of sight it, let it all come to you, and live forever. So yeah, Prot Warrior, high S tier right now. Guardian Druid. I'll tell you, I've taken Guardian Druid pretty high in the past. I had it quite high in Legion, where I had full 20+ dungeons done on it. I only like Guardian Druid when Galactic Guardian is absolutely slapping. And it looks like Galactic Guardian's in a pretty cool place based on a few arenas I queued. If it's doing as much damage as it's doing in arenas, I got to think Galactic Guardian's going to be quite good in Mythic Plus. Bear has a ton of survivability. They brought Rage of the Sleeper back. It's doing insane amounts of DPS. Again, I don't think I'd put it on Prot Warrior tier, but it's definitely an A tier tank. You're in a good spot with Bear Druid. It does get a little boring to play, but I think that's where all of these new talent trees really add to the Bear utility. And just the amount of damaging abilities, right? Every class has so many more active abilities than they've ever had before, because now we're getting Covenant abilities and additional abilities that are somewhat new to the class. Like BM Hunter, for example, gets Wailing Arrow, which is a blast to play around. But we'll get there when we get there. Let's get to Prop Paladin. These dungeons are a pain in the ass to group up, and that does not lend itself very well to a Prop Paladin, in my opinion. Its damage isn't as insane as it used to be. It seems like, at least not with the Prop Paladins that I've ran with. I've spammed a ton of dungeons so far in my free time here. It's not that great. I'll be honest with you. I don't think Prop Paladin is in a great spot. Yeah, B tier, maybe even C tier. But does that mean that your Prop Paladin's not going to be able to clear all Mythic 15s? No, your Prop Paladin's definitely going to still be able to clear full 15s, probably 20s. I think all of the tanks are able to do that. I just think some of them are going to have a much easier time than others. Prot Warrior probably having the easiest time. I think you could pretty much go into Prot Warrior with a 1-button macro on your mouse wheel, and you'll be all right there. So you just spin that mouse wheel and spin to win, right? Havoc DH, ton of utility, always a great tank, strong A tier. I think you'll see some Havoc DHs at the very top this season. Also, obviously, depends on some tuning. I know Fodder to the Flames trigger rate is no longer scaling with haste. Not sure if Vengeance was actually leveraging that, but it's got a ton of utility. The Demon Hunter class tree is super stacked. You have all your sigils back. You're in a great place. You're probably in a better place than you've ever been in. And you also do a ton of damage, and I believe you even still have Elysian Decree. So yeah, I mean, Havoc Demon Hunter was great in Vengeance Demon Hunter was great in Shadowlands. I think I've been calling it Havoc the whole time. It'll be great in Mythic Plus here as well. This brings us to Brewmaster. I really want to put Brewmaster on A tier with the rest of these guys, and I know I usually don't do that, but all the tanks are really in a good spot. But I think Brewmaster has a barrier to entry where you have to really know the class to play Brewmaster well. So I've been playing a bit of Brew so far. The first couple dungeons I did with it, I hadn't played it in a while, probably since Legion. I wasn't really feeling it, but then once I got into this groove where I could keep my HPS around like 8 to 9K and continue to do some really good damage, I've noticed it definitely had some strong points. But the problem with Brewmaster, and this is always the problem with it, is that it does, your health spikes around a bit, right? I don't think I can put it on the same tier as Paladin, though, because it is actually kind of pumping right now. And it has a ton of utility that it brings to Mythic Plus. I think I would just keep it on the same tier as A tier. And I'd probably bring Vengeance over Guardian. And I think that's the order for the tanks, honestly. The tanks are not in a bad spot. Any tank that you play, you're going to be able to Keystone Master on. Again, you might have an easier time on a Prot Warrior than any of the other ones, because I really think Prot Warrior takes the least amount of skill and it has the most bang for your buck. But tanks are in a great spot overall. This brings us to healers. And we're going to start out with the new guy, Evoker. I've got a lot of friends playing Evoker, so I've had the ability to thoroughly play with these guys in Mythic Plus. and I can honestly tell you that this is a C tier healer across the board. I don't know if all of my friends are terrible at this class or what, but I just feel like this class has some severe limitations in Mythic Plus with how spread out these dungeons can be. You're gonna need some real coordination to make Evoker work, a lot of stacking, a lot of playing close together, and that does not lend itself to the mechanics of these dungeons. I mean, they do great damage, so maybe you could bump them up to B. Yeah, I think you could bump Evoker up to B. That's about as high as I would take it. It's just got too many limitations in a Mythic Plus setting. I think it's an excellent arena healer, but we're doing a Mythic Plus tier list. So this takes us over to the Restoration Druid, and Resto Druid is absolutely slapping. Massive DPS, massive healing. The hots are absurd. They got a little nerf in regrowth, but that's okay because for cat weaving Resto Druids, you really weren't hard casting regrowth very often. You were in cat form, you were busting heads, and you were keeping your hots up on the boys, rocking maybe some flourish. So there's a lot that you can do to get around this regrowth nerf. They just got hit with that 6% regrowth nerf. But yeah, I mean, I think Resto Druid is still S tier. I think it's probably the best healer for the tier. I can't say enough good things about Resto Druid. It's also my favorite healer. When I do dabble in healing in Mythic Plus, it's generally on a Resto Druid. So I personally have a ton of experience with it. And even when Resto Druid's pretty bad, I can make it pretty good. So if I can do that, I think the real Resto Druids out there are going to turn some heads come MDI time. Resto Shaman, man. Resto Shaman's in a rough spot. If you like Resto Shaman, it's probably going to get better because it really can't get any worse. I'm going to keep them on the C tier because I don't think they're a D tier class. I really don't think, just looking at what we have down here, right? I do think there's one D tier Mythic Plus class. At the very least, one Mythic Plus healer. There'll be other classes joining it. But yeah, Resto Shaman, not in a great spot. It just doesn't do as much damage as the other healers, and it has trouble keeping up right now, I notice. I really didn't like the dungeons I played with a Resto Druid. I rarely need healing anyway on my classes because I'm taking advantage of Karma and Windwalker's 20 walls, or playing BM, so I won't get hit by mechanics. But yeah, Resto Druid doesn't feel that good, I notice. Holy Paladin, I'd put Holy Paladin right in the middle. I think it's a solid healer. Not too shabby. They have some good damage, solid cooldowns. You can never go wrong with a Paladin with wings. You got a ton of HPS coming your way. They always do decent damage. I think it's a solid middle of the pack healer. Again, right? The problem with Holy Paladins is that they have to be in melee DPS a lot of the times, or melee range a lot of the times. And this expansion is not going to be a forgiving expansion on melee. I think we're going to see that as you progress through the keystones. I think at the highest levels, you'll see people taking advantage of like Windwalker monks and outlaw rogues. You'll probably see the meta go with like a 2 melee, 1 ranged meta. But I just do not think I don't think Holy Paladin's going to be the healer, right? I don't think it's too much melee range. I know Resto Druid's cat weaving, but you go in and out. HPal, you really just want to be in the thick of it the majority of the time. There's too much stuff on the ground. They're middle of the pack, but great healer overall. Mistweaver Monk, you guys are on the bottom for me in the dungeons, man. I have ran with many Mistweaver Monks, and I just don't think they're bringing the juice this time around. It seemed like they struggle with throughput. I think they're probably a good healer in a raid setting, and in arena they'll be excellent. But in Mythic Plus, I actually think you're the worst healer in the game right now. It's a toss up between you and Resto Shaman, but I think Resto Shaman has a chance to come out of the trenches before you do. Um, yeah, it's unfortunate because a cool fist weaving holy paladin style like melee mistweaver monk would seem cool on paper, but they can never really get it right. We'll see how they progress throughout the expansion. I know they just got a lot of buffs. Yeah, I mean the buffs might bring it up. Let's bring it up to the same tier as Resto Shaman. It seems pretty substantial. You're getting Awakened Feline Spinning Crane Crick. Now heals 3 nearby allies for 60% of the damage done. So you're getting a 10% there. Vivify Healing. It's a primary target increased by 20%. Big for your tank heals. Peaceful Mending now increases healing received by Enveloping Mist and Renewing Mist by 30%. So you're getting 10% there. Works out to like a 30% buff there. And Yulon's Whisper now heals 5 targets, was 6, which that's perfect for a raid or a Mythic Plus setting. And the healing's increased by 15%. All right. We'll see where Mistweaver goes. I still don't think it's going to be super strong. But let's see, right? I think it's at least Resto Shaman tier. This brings us to Holy Priest. I think Holy Priest is always pretty decent. I'd put it in A tier. Holy Priest is definitely a solid Mythic Plus healer. Is it the best? No. But it has its perks. It was great in Shadowlands, and it really didn't change too much from Shadowlands like Mythic Plus style healing. So I think Holy Priest is in a good spot. And Disciplined Priest rounds out my healer picks firmly in the middle of the pack in the B tier. The problem with Discipline Priest is that you always have to be doing damage to heal. So in those mechanics where you might not have targets to do damage to, but a dot is still ticking on your party, I can think like Breckenridge, or it's probably not even called Breckenridge, Breckenfall. Anyway, the poison dungeon. A Disc Priest would suffer with those kind of dot settings, right? They usually suffer with like Grievous, except I think you can mass dispel that off now. So yeah, it's generally a lower tier than this, but I think its healing is pretty strong right now. And most of the dungeons should lend itself to some solid group healing. A lot of the pulls in these dungeons right now are like 4 to 5 target pulls. At default, right? Without extra grouping. So it really lends itself to having a lot of targets to heal off of. And it also lends itself just to being really fun to play these dungeons right now. So I think that's also why it's tough for me to want to call any class bad, because every class really has an opportunity to shine in these dungeons. Everybody's going to be pumping because of the way they're laid out. I think they did a great job laying these dungeons out. This brings us over to Feral Druid. And we start our melee DPS. I have to say, I think Feral is firmly in the A or B tier. Here's the problem with Feral Druid. I'm going to bring it down to the B tier. You're competing in a very competitive spot for melee DPS, and I've run with some Ferals that do pretty good damage, but none has been able to hold a candle to my monk, and I've even been eclipsing them on my hunter. I'll just tell you, I've been playing Beastmaster. I play a lot of survival. And I think survival's in a pretty cool spot right now. They just got a 5% damage buff, so I have to try it out again this week. But I've been playing BM the last couple days, and BM is banging right now. I'm not going to jump over to them, but the point of this was basically saying Feral is in a very, very awkward spot where it competes against Windwalker Monk, Outlaw Rogue, Havoc Demon Hunter. And at that point, it's like, who am I going to bring, right? One of the big 3 or the Feral Druid. You got to go with the big 3, right? You can even call it the big 4 with Unholy DK, right? Last year, you had Survival Hunter as another big AoE banger that would have competed with Feral Druid's spot. You're in a tough spot as a Feral Druid. So B tier in Mythic Plus is still much better than it's ever been. You guys are going to be pumping in dungeons. The Ferals I've played with have all been really good. But again, you're not a Windwalker monk. And for melee, I think Windwalker is the king of the castle. I'm very surprised we didn't see any buffs to this AoE touch of death that they're letting us do every minute and a half now. Maybe it's kind of pad damage, but at the end of the day, in those high keys, hitting every mob in front of you, like 4 or 5 mobs in front of you for 100k, isn't going to suck. And that's going to scale with your health. Windwalker's in a crazy place, and that's just one of the many cooldowns, right? You're always coordinating your Ceph with your Strike of the Windlord and your Zuyen every other Ceph. So it just feels like you always have a cooldown up on Windwalker Monk because you do. It's up every minute. You're just this 1 minute murder machine, and then even outside of your cooldowns, your damage is pretty damn good. The only thing I'll say is Windwalker's a little bit squishy, but they gave it like 3 walls now. So you have Fortifying Brew, you have Dampen Harm, and you have Diffuse Magic. And on top of that, you have Karma. So you're able to offset a lot of your losses there by playing this squishy class. Now, Expel Harm's also doing a ton of healing. And you can take a node that'll allow you to heal more with your Expel Harm based on how much health you have missing. So that'll be nice in high keys when you're dealing with a lot of these ground mechanics. Because again, they decided that this was the expansion, that they were going to put circles on the ground for every single dungeon 11 times over. This is the circle on the ground expansion. The floor is lava. Do not stand in it. It's melee DPS has a ton of talent, but you have to be very good to play in melee range, especially at high keys. This brings us to Outlaw Rogue. Again, there's so much utility and so much survivability, and you do so much damage on this class. I actually think, here's what I think the meta is going to be. I'll be completely honest with you. I think you're going to see Windwalker, Outlaw, and Beast Mastery Hunter holding hands in a physical triangle of death. Now, you could go another way with like Havoc, Fire Mage when the gear comes up a little bit more, especially with all those buffs, and maybe like a demo lock. But I think that the Windwalker and the Outlaw combo is just too strong. You top that off with a Beast Mastery Hunter, take full advantage of the Windwalker's physical buff, and that's a hell of a comp right there for your DPS players. But yeah, Outlaw, really insane right now. You can't say anything bad about it. Havoc Demon Hunter, man, they do so much damage. I don't know how you keep this class off the S tier. They have a ton of survivability. They have a ton of damage. I try to create barriers to getting onto my S tier, but they've just made these specs so good in Dragonflight that you almost can't pick a bad class. It's crazy. Melee is in an incredible spot, but the trade-off again with playing melee is all of the crazy mechanics you're going to have. Havoc, you guys are absolutely pumping right now. And you're only going to get better. Unholy DK, another huge pumper melee in the right hands, could be S tier. Really, this could trade with Havoc. You could do a Havoc Unholy comp, Havoc Unholy Fire, or Havoc Unholy Demo Lock. Oh man, there's so many comps that you could do. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing with Havoc or with Unholy DK. It should probably be on the same tier as Havoc DH, but here's why it's not. Because you need to pull around the Unholy DK, whereas with Havoc Demon Hunter, you're just always doing damage. So you're going to be able to carry pugs more on that class. And I think that's why Havoc is S tier in my tier list and Unholy falls to A tier. Because in the right hands and in the right comp, Unholy's an absolutely S tier class. But for the majority of us that are just trying to get Keystone Master, maybe push to clear all 20s, Unholy, you're going to have to get pulled around. So if you're not in the right group, Unholy could go from A tier to B or C tier. But we'll keep it at A tier, as kind of a happy median for Unholy. But it is in a great spot. DK in general is in a good spot. Survival Hunter, I think, is firmly in the B tier. There's people that have been selling this spec short. I leveled up with it. I ran dungeons with it at 70. I don't see why people think it's bad. It does great single target damage, and the AoE is there if you spec for it. I was pumping on AoE packs, um, keeping up with some of these other S tier classes on AoE. So I don't know. Maybe people just haven't figured out the survival hunter rotation yet. Maybe I need to, make a survival video, right? But I think survival's firmly in the middle of the pack overall for Mythic Plus. It's not going to be a bad thing to bring. It's just, again, right? You're competing with Windwalker, Outlaw Rogue, Havoc Demon Hunter. And I don't think the 5% buff gets you there yet. I don't think it gets you there yet. Let's see with tier bonuses, how all that shakes out. Maybe my next list changes, but I think right now, Survival Hunter is firmly in the middle of the pack. This takes us to Frost DK. Frost DK is in the middle. There's really nothing wrong with it. It just doesn't do as much damage as everybody else. This is on the end of the B tier. You're gonna have great burst DPS, and really, actually, in these dungeons with the way the packs are, Frost DK will probably be in a really good spot. Might even be higher on the B tier, honestly. I guess it just depends on tuning and how they're going. I haven't seen too many Frost DKs yet, but I think they could probably do well. They're definitely a B tier DPS in the current tier. Assassination Rogue just got hit with a big Exsanguinate nerf. I gotta throw them at the bottom of the C tier. I mean, it's the C tier for DPS. They're a great single target class still, even with the Exsanguinate nerf, but I don't think that they're that great in this meta. Maybe they deserve to be on the B tier. But I mean, you have Outlaw and Sub, which I firmly believe Subtlety is a B tier class in this expansion. The pulls completely lend itself to Subtlety's cooldowns. I think as Sub gets a little bit more gear and kind of starts coming into its own with more of the better players coming over and experimenting with it, you might even see Sub take over Outlaw's spot as we get further along in the expansion. So I think Sub is a dark horse to kind of watch out for. Ret Paladin, it's not really fun to play right now. The damage is okay, but it's not great. I guess Paladin overall, maybe Wrath of the Lich King, they're too strong in that expansion. Rets, you guys are on the bottom there too, though. I think the lesson here is that no matter what expansion you play, right? Don't play Ret Paladin. No, I'm just kidding, because I played Ret Paladin season 1 of Shadowlands, got Keystone Master on it. It's a fun class, but so many other classes bring more. And then when you use your utility, you do less damage. So I used to, wog people during Pridefuls. And then we realized it's not even worth me helping the healer, because you should be putting those into damage and you'd get the Prideful down faster. So yeah, I just don't think Ret really lends itself to Mythic Plus. It'll probably be fine in Raid. But I think it's firmly at the bottom, the first D tier Mythic Plus class for sure. Enhance, I would say, is middle of the pack for Mythic Plus. It's got a lot of front loaded damage. They're really bursting in PvP right now, and when you can do that, that generally lends itself to a good Mythic Plus profile. But again, there's a lot of competition in the melee DPS slot, and you don't do anything better than the current S tier classes. So you're going to do good damage. Again, it's not going to be bad, but you have to work so hard on Enhance to where, you could roll one of these other classes, put in a little bit less work, and get a lot more out of it. Arms Warrior, it's another class that I think is in the B tier. Arms is looking pretty good, to be honest with you. A lot of big burst AoE. They just struggle single target. Fury, same story. Ton of burst AoE. You saw my video on the bleed build from beta. But they just, they struggle a little bit single target. I would probably put Arms ahead of Fury, actually. I'd drop Fury down to the C tier in season 1. I don't think Fury Warrior is that great. I think Arms actually probably has better burst AoE than it right now, or better sustained AoE, and that's what you're really going to want. It's all about sustained damage, and the high Mythic Plus keys. You want a ton of damage, and you want to be able to have it forever. This brings us into Boomkin. I think Boomkin is firmly C tier right now. I don't think it's terribly D tier. I've heard a lot of naysayers, you know, uh, speaking the this is the end times for Boomkin. They didn't get any tuning in the December 5th changes, which surprised me a little bit. I'd really like to see Boomkin go back to the dad build, like that type of play style where you're putting down your starfall, you're able to put down multiple starfalls. You have Oniths making your, where your star surges give you free starfalls, and then your starfalls can give you free star surges. That playstyle was probably the best Boomkin ever was. I think with the talent trees, it would enable Blizzard to recreate something like that. That's when I was, clearing 25s on my Boomkin. I loved it. I had one of the highest Vault of the Warden and Seat of the Triumvirate clears in the world at the time. Um, I had a ton of fun on Boomkin in Legion. Bring back the dad build. If Blizzard ever brings back dad build in its true form, Boomy immediately goes from C to S tier in Mythic Plus, no matter what. It's great. Devastation. Man, I can't really get into these dragon classes in Mythic Plus. If you're gonna take a range DPS, I don't think these guys are it. They do some good damage, but it's a lot of hard casting. I guess you can move while you're casting after you use your dashes. So maybe it's not fully D tier. The Devastation guys I've played with have already re-rolled off the class for Mythic Plus. They just think there's better options out there. Mages are always solid. There's some very solid showings coming from Warlocks right now. I don't think Devastation is it. This takes us over to Arcane Mage, which I'm going to do something controversial. I'm actually not going to put Arcane in the A tier. I'm going to put it middle of the pack for range DPS. It's a very complicated rotation, and if you're running with a Windwalker monk, I actually played with an Arcane Mage buddy, and I killed mobs too fast for his cleave. That won't happen in higher keys. Like, we only have access to Mythic Zeros now. Maybe they go a little bit better, but I'm actually not super excited about what I see out of Arcane right now. Fire, on the other hand, I think Fire with this recent round of buffs is going to absolutely slap. Again, you're playing around that combustion cooldown, but I think in that cooldown with that muy complicado rotation, good players are going to get a lot out of Fire. And I think Fire is generally in a great spot for Mythic Plus. Now, this leads us into Frost, who I also think is in the A tier. I think in the higher keys, when you're pulling big with the consistent damage that Frost has, you do have to hard cast a lot. But with your ice lances and your splitting ice, that you have the ability to kind of pivot out of those stupid circles that are all over the ground in these dungeons, and you just do a lot of damage. Frozen Orb is great. Blizzard is great. Your icicles are great. Your frost bolts are banging. It's a consistent spec. Maybe it doesn't deserve to be A tier, but I think as you acquire more gear, Frost is only going to get stronger. Same as Fire, whereas Arcane, I think, is like the quick barrier to entry, get some bang for your buck. I think we're going to see Frost and Fire Mages outperforming Arcane in this season of Mythic Plus. Takes us to Shadow Priest, which I think is firmly middle of the pack. They had some nerfs done to them a couple weeks ago with regards to like their Mythic Plus damage profile. But it's not going to stop you from getting Keystone Master. They're still pumping. I just don't think they're going to be on the same level as our Fire and Frost mages and, your Unholy DKs and all those crazy melees. But comparing them with the melees isn't even really that fair of a comparison, because we're trying to split this up into tanks, healers, melees, and range DPS. I think Shadow Priest, it would be considered on the same tier as an Arcane Mage as we move through this season. But again, middle of the pack isn't bad. You're going to be able to clear your 20s just fine. Elemental Shaman, I'm going to go A or B. They bring Lust, which is very nice. And these pulls do lend themselves to the Ellie Shaman profile. I think they're better than Shadow Priest and Arcane Mage. Yeah, I think Ellie's got to be an A tier class. If I don't put Elemental Shaman on A tier, Petco will show us why Elemental Shaman is at least A tier in the first week of Mythic Plus. Ellie bangs. It's always great in a Mythic Plus setting. When it slumps off and single target damage in raid, you know, it's always had Mythic Plus to kind of fall back on. And I think with the damage profile of these pulls, where you get a lot of like 4 to 6 mob pulls in these dungeons this season, and some old favorites coming back like Court of Stars, I think Ellie's profile is going to be very solid in that setting. Takes us to Marksman Hunter. Marksman just got a pretty solid buff. But I still don't think that was enough. Let me take a look. The Marksman buff was all their damage was increased by baseline 10%. Heavy ammo now causes trick shot ricochets to deal an additional 25% damage. So again, that lends itself very well to the Mythic Plus damage profile. And you had explosive shot damage has been increased by 15%, as well as barrage. I think you'll get some use out of that explosive shot. I know I was on Survival Hunter. So yeah, I mean, Marksman got a pretty solid buff. I would still think it is the middle of the pack based on who it's competing against. I would call it the end of the B tier. But again, Marksman's a class that scales great with gear, so it could probably make some moves as we move throughout the expansion. This takes us to demo locks. I think demo locks are the top of the A tier. The only problem I foresee with demo locks is the amount of casting that you have to do on the class. You're always casting, and in high keys that might be a little bit difficult to do because there's a lot of mechanics that don't lend itself very well to casting. It's the same reason I was iffy about where I ranked Frost Mage, but I think that high consistent damage profile that all of these classes are bringing on the A tier. Fire is obviously just massive burst, and you pull around it, similar to Unholy DK. But I think the profile of Frost, Demo, and Elemental are in the same ballpark. I just think Demo's the best of these three. And then you have Fire over here that with an experienced team similar to Unholy DK, you could pull around the class and do some crazy things. So I think our Demonology Warlock is in a good spot at A tier. Destruction Warlock, I'd put at the top of the B tier. I think Destro does very well in Mythic Plus, but I don't think Season 1 it's going to do as well as Demo. That's my opinion there. Demo just feels really, really good with that consistent damage profile, where Destruction, you know, here's the thing with Destruction Warlock, I don't think it feels that good when Destruction is good in Mythic Plus. Shadowlands was a great example where Destro is just like, it was good, but like it wasn't even fun to play because you were pressing one button, two buttons, it felt like, right? A ton of Rain of Fire spam, dropping your cooldowns, getting your infernals out, and you'll see more of that this time. So Destro will be good. It won't be as broken as it was in Shadowlands, obviously, but you know, I think top of the B tier is a good place for Destruction Warlock. But that shows you how good Warlocks are, right? You have two specs in the same class in the A and B tier. You know, look at Monk, right? You have your Windwalker and your tank very high. A lot of classes, you know, you can see that theme. So you really can't go wrong with specializations. Now, here's my dark horse representative of range DPS, S tier. Beast Mastery Hunter, I'm not kidding. I think with the tier set that's coming out for it, it just feeds into its damage profile. It's going to allow it to keep the 3 stack of Barb Shop up even more. The class is banging right now. I'm pulling like 50, 60K overall in dungeons. Maybe not 60K. I've pulled 48 to 52K at 365 item level. I logged out at 367 tonight. The class is really, really suited for these dungeons. I think you're going to see, if no changes happen to Beast Mastery, I think you're going to see Beast Mastery as the Lust representative in MDI this season. And I think you're going to see it with Windwalker and Outlaw Rogue. These 3 classes go extremely well together. Beast Mastery is basically immortal. It cannot die. You have that big wall every 2.5 minutes. You can feign multiple mechanics in these dungeons. I've already feigned quite a few. Just kind of testing things out, like boss target mechanics. You can feign breaths and cones, all types of stuff when they target you. On top of that, the entirety of this expansion, again, is circles on the ground and ridiculous fears. And these are all things that Beast Mastery can break up with freezing traps and kicks and stuns. So it brings a lot of utility to the table there as well. There's also a lot of enrage mechanics, and Beast Mastery gets Trank Shot. That's up like every 8 seconds. And you can even dispel the enrage on like the tree boss when it or the frog boss when it enrages. So there's plenty of enrages to dispel. The utility's there. I really think Beast Mastery Hunter is S tier. Might be an unpopular opinion, but I think you're going to see a lot of these because these dungeons are very melee unfriendly. And unless you're super confident and ready to sweat on one of these S tier melees, you could just log on a Beast Mastery Hunter, have your cooldowns up almost 100% of the time, it feels like. Here's the thing, right? Without the 2-set, 4-set bonus that you're getting, where you're going to be able to keep up your barb shots more and get more barb shots out, your Bestial Wrath is up so often that you're just flowing. The rotation just flows at low gear. So the higher your gear goes, the more it's going to flow. This class has S tier written all over it. I haven't seen anybody call it S tier yet. Maybe people just aren't playing it yet because they were really hoping the marksman dream or the survival dream was still there from the end of Shadowlands. I think you're going to see more Beast Mastery Hunters, boys. And that takes us into Affliction Lock, which I believe rounds out at the B tier. It is a great, I think it's higher than Destro. I'm going to put it higher than Destro. I think because of the way the pulls are in these dungeons, in high keys, you're going to see AF absolutely pump. It's going to have some great AoE that it hasn't always been able to bring to the table. It's solid. It's in a good spot. Really, you can't go wrong on any of the Warlock specializations. So if you really love AF, play AF, you're going to get Keystone Master. If you love Destro, play Destro, you're going to get Keystone Master. And if you really love Demo, you're going to have, that consistent damage profile that I keep speaking so highly of. And when I say consistent damage profile, I mean on packs of like 5-6 mobs, you're just consistently doing like 70,000 DPS. Like on my BM Hunter, if there's a 5-pack, I'm doing like 70 to 90K on those mobs. I've finished some dungeons over 50K, over 48K, usually like Brecken Hall or whatever the heck it's called, Breckenridge. And a few others. These consistent, high, like often cooldown usage specs are going to bang this tier. And this is my list, guys. So if you made it this far, I appreciate you for watching the list. I hope you took something out of this. I hope I didn't disappoint you too hard. If you're a rep paladin or an evoker, you know, at least you can RP, right? If you're a reptile, you can go to Stratholme and like run around with your shield for the light or whatever. And if you're an evoker, you know, they got like rule 34s for that kind of stuff. You can do some weird stuff, I'm sure. Guys, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, drop me a subscription, click that red button. It's free for you, and it continues to keep the channel growing. I'll have more content coming in the future. Have a good day, have a good week, have a good month, and have a good year. Tomatosaucin out, Beast Mastery Hunter firmly in.